Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, look at the articles in detail for their relevance in the mains as well as the prelims examination. Today, in total, we are going to have a coverage of 10 different topics in varying lengths and degrees, depending upon their relevance. So, the five topics that we are going to discuss initially, they are going to be in detailed coverage relevant for your mains examination. And the remaining five, they are going to be relevant for the prelims examination in some capacity or the other. The first topic, a lofty concept, a governor and an unwanted controversy. This is an editorial piece which is talking about a controversy which has erupted in the state of Kerala owing to the governor's obeisance to the portrait of Bharat Mata. Now, with the help of this, not only will we touch upon the controversy between the governor and the elected representatives a bit, but then an interesting point which has been mentioned in the article is about the anthropomorphization of nations. What is that concept? Why it is a binding yet a dividing factor in the modern times? Is it something that we observe only in India, or does it have a global context as well? So that anthropomorphization of nation is again something we are going to discuss with the help of this topic. This is relevant for your GS paper too. Now, the axis of upheaval in West Asia conflict. Now, this is a continuum of yesterday's topic of discussion where we talked about how Iran finds itself isolated without much of a voice of its international partners and allies. Now, why that is the case and what is the impact of it? That is again relevant for your GS2. Enabling voting rights for migrants. Now, given that the various different state elections are on the offing, now the migrant population from those states, like the state of Bihar, now they don't get to exercise their voting rights in that particular state. So, what can be done and what are the hindrances in ensuring that they are able to vote? Again, relevant for your GS2. Now, should the method of counting castes change? This is about the caste census, the type of questions which are being framed in the census exercise. Now, will they be, or will those questions be sufficient enough to capture the socio-economic changes and progresses in the caste, or is there a need to relook at those questions again? So, this is again relevant for your GS paper too. Israel Iran war highlights Mideast's waning sway on oil prices. Now, this talks about the volatility in oil prices and how it has reduced with every passing conflict in the case of West Asia. So, this is relevant both for GS2 as well as for GS3. Now, some of the articles we have extracted some of the points relevant for your prelims. There is a river which is in news, that is the Kulsi River, which is a tributary of river Brahmaputra. A hydropower project is planned and proposed to be set up in this particular river, and that is why it is in news. There is a festival in news as well that we are going to discuss, Bonalu. Now, rural demand likely recovered, which is indicative of India's strong showing in economic parameters in the month of May. That is what the industry analysts they estimate. Now, we are also going to talk about GAVI, owing to the fact that Bharat Biotech has announced its intention to provide malarial vaccine. And India may retaliate against the US if the trade talks fail. That is again one of the articles in the business page. So these are the various different articles that we are going to have a discussion for today. And wherever possible, we shall analyze the type of questions and also go about answer writing practice. Now, when it comes to answer writing, comprehensive analysis of the PYQs is an important medium to gain an idea not only about which areas to focus, but also how to and which content to be put in those answers. Keeping that in mind, today at 7 p.m., we are going to have a live session for answer writing discussion. We are going to discuss the past 10 years of mains question when it comes to the subject of geography. Now, this is not a session where straight away we will have a write up and we are going to narrate that write up. It is not a session where random model answers are going to be provided. It is a session for discussion where you can put your points forward and you can also have a say in which areas to contribute and also which maps to focus upon for your preparation of the mains exam. Even for those appearing for this year as well as those appearing for next year, this is a session which you cannot miss. So catch us live and join us live at 7 p.m. on the Unacademy platform. Now, in order to improve your GS preparation and in order to ensure that 2026 is the year or 2027 is the year where you achieve success, we have come up with a lucrative offer of 19,999 with up to 12 months of subscription. Using the code IS English, you can avail further discount and you will be able to avail GS lectures with the top educators of the country, CSAT and GS coverage within a time span, ensuring mentorship, PSAT, plus the test series availability as well. Now, having said that, let us start with the discussion of the first topic, that is a lofty concept, a governor and unwanted controversy. Now, this is an interesting controversy. No controversy is interesting for that matter. But the manner in which it has spiraled again indicates a kind of a broken bridge between the governor and the elected representatives in various different states. Now, we have seen examples of this broken bridge in the region of Tamil Nadu, in the case of West Bengal, and so on. But now the controversy has erupted in the state of Kerala. Now, this was basically in a particular event in Raj Bhavan last week. And this image is what sparked all the controversy, where the minister of the Kerala government staged a protest and eventually walked out of this prize giving ceremony. So there was this event which was organized in Raj Bhavan. Just to give you the context of it, there was an event organized in Raj Bhavan to give prizes to the scouts, the Boy Scouts. Now, during that event and in the initial part of that event, you had the governor paying respect to the image of Bharat Mata and thereby laying the floral tribute. Now, the state government argues that when we talk about Bharat Mata or the image of Bharat Mata, it is not recognized in the constitution. It is not recognized as a national anthem or a national song or a national symbol or any kind of a national figure for that matter. So thereby, governor has got no right to carry this out or carry this process out. And this act by the governor is viewed by the Kerala government as imbibing or forcing certain cultural intricacies. Because the argument is that this paying of obeisance to Bharat Mata is something which is usually done in the case of, as the article argues, in the RSS meetings as well as in the case of BJP meetings or a political party's meetings. So that is where the argument is that can a governor do this? If the state government is not willing to do it, or if the state government finds something objectionable, does the governor have the right to carry out veneration of any image or any portrait in his or her official capacity? That is what the article is about. Now, when we talk about Bharat Mata and the entire image of Bharat Mata, now this has got an origin more than a century back. Basically, the genesis or the origin of the entire aspect of creation of this Bharat Mata lies in the creation of Bong Mata or the mother of Bengal. Now, initially, the personification as a mother figure was done by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in the 19th century work Anand Mat. Now, that is where he created this mother like figure. And what he created was not Bharat Mata initially, but was referred to as Bong Mata. Later on, that morphed into Bharat Mata. Now, it became a powerful symbol and a symbolism for Bengali nationalism, a kind of a uniting factor. Later on, Abanindranath Tagore, nephew of Rabindranath Tagore, basically encapsulated the idea of Bong Mata with the help of a painting, a kind of a painting which was created that was like the personification. Now, painting of the Bharat Mata, or rather the Bong Mata, was done in 1905. Remember, 1905 is the era of a surge in Bengal nationalism. against the partition of Bengal, that is when the uniting factor was required and was galvanized at the grassroots level. And that is when Abanindranath Tagore did create that painting. Later on, Sister Nivedita, who was one of the famous disciples and the prominent disciples of Swami Vivekananda, now basically she named it as Bharat Mata, and that became a popular symbol for Indian nationalism. Now, that symbol of Indian nationalism, now it was never official symbol, and it was never declared as an official symbol that okay, Bharat Mata and the image of Bharat Mata is the one which unites us all. But nonetheless, it was viewed by the various different individuals from various different parts of the country as a uniting factor, something to fight for. Now, this article even quotes Pandit Nehru's own observation in his work of Discovery of India, where he describes that wherever he goes, he hears the chants of Bharat Mata Ki Jai. And thereby, Pandit Nehru argues, and basically, in a way, he questions to himself what is this concept of Bharat Mata? Is it the mountains, the rivers, the lakes, the land which gives so much of agricultural produce? Is that Bharat Mata? But Pandit Nehru himself concludes that no, it is the people of India who are actually representative of that Bharat Mata. So it is a lofty idea, it is a lofty ideal, but thereby the governor using this in his official capacity has stoked a controversy and a large controversy nonetheless. Now, here, when we talk about the case of governor using that portrait of Bharat Mata for veneration, for paying respect, etc., now there, official capacity is the one which comes to mind. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, at the time of the debates in the Constituent Assembly when the framing of the Constitution was well on its way, had famously quoted that the role of governor in a well functioning state democracy is nothing, where without the state's action or without the state's recommendation, he will not be able to do anything in a manner that indicates that unless and until the state cabinet and the state government gives the recommendation to the governor cannot act in his or her own direction. And that is one of the mandates, the constitutional mandates for the office of governor. So, thereby, if the state government for any particular state decides that a particular image cannot be used or should not be used, then the governor, as per the constitution, this article argues, has got no right to use that image. And this is where the controversy begins. Basically, the governor has issued a statement that paying reverence to the image of Bharat Mata is indicative of a larger unity and a uniting factor to galvanize national sentiment. Now, that argument again has got some depth or some kind of depth associated to it, but then the governor cannot do it in his or her official capacity. That is the reality. Now, while this controversy will rage on, and we will hear more about this in the coming days, it gives rise to a very important and a pertinent question, which we see spanning across the globe. And that is the concept of anthropomorphization of a nation state. Now, when you think about a country, now what is this anthropomorphization? Anthropomorphization basically is rendering or representing a country with a strong figure, with a strong image, right? That image can be that of a man or a woman. It basically indicates that national strength. Now, embodiment of a nation would be done throughout the 1700s and throughout the past millennia in order to provide a galvanizing factor for the national unity so that everybody could rally under the flag. But this concept of anthropomorphization of nation, while it has worked wonders in the previous centuries, its relevance in the present day and context is challenged day in and day out. And what do we mean by that? For example, when we say Bharat Mata, it is the embodiment or anthropomorphization of Indian motherland, Mother India, isn't it? Now, is India the only country where you have such a kind of a treatment or where you have such a tradition of treating Mother India or Bharat Mata with that kind of a reverence or veneration? The answer is no. This is something which is inspired by Western ideals which have prevailed for centuries prior to the embodiment of Bharat Mata and that national figure itself. Not a national figure because, again, that gains a connotation of official sanction, but a kind of a national uniting factor during the freedom movement. Now, in front of you, I have put certain images which indicates that anthropomorphization of nations is something which has been happening across the world for centuries. For example, the first image that you see is the case of Marianne in the case of France. Now, that was seen as a uniting factor and representation of French liberalism, right? The French ideas of equality and fraternity. That is something which were to be represented by Marianne. Now, the second image that you see, this one, this is a representation of Britannia, the strength of the British power. Now, this was a kind of a portrait, a sculpture embodiment, which provided or which was used as one of those motivators or strengthening factors when it came to British unity, the symbolism of British imperialism, the aspect of a common goal of British upliftment. That is where Britannia was used. But the same thing is not restricted only in the region of Western Europe. Here, you see the image of Mother Russia. So this has been done in various different countries. In the case of US, prior to the Civil War, there was the creation of the Uncle Sam. Prior to that, there was Colombia. So US also has gone through these phases. Now, there are certain benefits associated with this anthropomorphization, but there are certain issues associated as well. What are the benefits associated? And first of all, what is the definition of it? Definition: representing a country or a nation as a human figure, often with symbolic features, strength, etc., which convey the values, identity, and ideas. That is the reason for anthropomorphization. Marianne in France, Britannia in UK, Mother Russia in the case of Russia, Uncle Sam in the case of US, even Colombia in the case of US. The personification reflects national values, strength, sacrifice, the aspect of liberal aspect, or even unity, commonly used in propaganda, art, literature, and even patriotic symbolism. So that is where it has historically been used. So, if it has been historically used even in our freedom struggle, the article in itself argues that throughout the national struggle and struggle for freedom and independence, Bharat Mata was a rallying cry in order to provide strength in the face of British oppression. So, the aspect of Bharat Mata and paying reverence to it, that is not at question. The question is the governor's own action. But then, in the modern day and age, this entire concept of anthropomorphization is being questioned by many analysts and thinkers across the globe. So let us understand some of the lacunae and the challenging part. We know the advantages. It can be a rallying call for strength, unity, national aspect, national ideas, etc. But what are the drawbacks? The drawbacks, or the aspect of where it is criticized, are manifold. First of all these anthropomorphic images or depiction, so to say, they represent a part of the past. They are not a testament to the modern realities. So this is where you will find, be it the case of Marianne or even Britannia. Britannia had for a long period of time been used as a symbol of British colonialism or imperial power. Now, that is something which is associated with oppressive images in many parts of the world. And that cannot be put into purpose or use in the modern times without offending someone. So, that is where it is rooted in the past. The past. And that can be objectionable to many. At the same time, when we talk about, let's suppose, creating an anthropomorphic image, in the case of, let's suppose, a male or a female figure, now that does not entirely end up representing the national diversity. Diversity not only in terms of ethnicity, in terms of racial diversity, in terms of linguistic diversity, in terms of cultural diversity, in terms of the diversity of male, female, etc. So all of that might not be reflected. So undermines the diversity, right? Now, one of the argument which is also made in the modern day and age and the modern context is that this phenomena of anthropomorphization, that is not relevant in the present times anymore. In the present times, when you have the world getting shorter and smaller due to the communication technologies and the development thereby, now we don't need those individual instruments of unification or unity. This would be valid at the time of oppression, at the time of division. This is a time of unification and this is a time of status quo. So that is where the relevance in the modern times is again relevance in modern times. Okay? In question. So here you see that there are certain benefits associated, but at the same time, you need to be aware of the disadvantages and why this always leads to a kind of riling up of sentiments in various parts of the world. So, with the help of this article, what have we taken a look into and what have we understood? We started with the controversy which has erupted in the state of Kerala owing to the veneration of the Bharat Mata portrait by the governor. The question being, can the governor, in his or her official capacity, choose to do this, whereby it is not a national symbol, it is not a national anthem, it is not a national song or anything like that, or it is not decreed even in the constitution. So, can the governor do that in his or her official capacity? The answer is no. And when it comes to the Kerala state government, now the state government has raised an objection to it. So if the state government raises an objection, that is the end of the matter. And that is where the Constituent Assembly debates Dr. Ambedkar's argument. They more than fulfill the argument regarding what a governor can do and what a governor should not do. Now, this is a kind of creation of a needless controversy, as the article argues, where both sides end up losing the trust with each other. And that is where the larger concept of federalism, which is a basic structure of our constitution, that gets put into question. But then that raises a larger question, which is hidden in the subterranean level, and that is the entire anthropomorphization of a nation. Now, is India the only country to have done so? No. Which are the other countries which have done so? We have taken a look at the examples of France, Britain, US, Russia, and so on. Even in the case of Germany, you have the creation of Germania. So, various different countries have done so. Now, what were the strengths and what are the drawbacks of anthropomorphization? I hope that is also understood. Okay. Now, here, basically, let us take a look at the question. Discuss the term anthropomorphization of nations. Critically analyze the utility of it in the modern times. Now, when you have the framing of critically analyze, you have to give the negative side of the argument is. So, first of all, the definition of it, what it was, that is an embodiment of the national identity in the form of a male or a female figure with certain abilities or qualities, that is anthropomorphization. So, that is what you would write in the intro, the definition of it. Okay. And then in the body part, you talk about the history of it. Has it been done in various different countries? So, historical background. And there provide the examples. Okay. Examples across the world. Then after that, talk about the relevance, positive, point wise. And then, despite these positives, there are huge question marks about the entire concept of anthropomorphization, which can be termed as, and then list out the disadvantages. negative. Okay? Eventually, the conclusion, which is generally in a kind of a way forward, here you talk about the aspect of consensus and the case of national peace and national unity. Now, for that, anthropomorphization is not needed, but welfareism is a way to go. And that is something where the modern day governance and administration should be rooted, reflecting the realities of the modern day age. I hope that is clear. Okay? Now, after this, we move on to the next article. The axis of upheaval in West Asia conflict. Now, this is a continuation of the article that we discussed yesterday, where we had discussed that in the conflict between Iran and Israel, which was a 12-day conflict, now not more than 10 days of action which was seen there, but still it meant substantial amount of attack in each other's territory. In that conflict which was raging on in West Asia, Iran found itself isolated. Now, the Western powers have largely treated this as axis of evil. That is, the countries of Russia, China, Iran. They have treated this as axis of evil. So that is where the axis of upheaval has basically been. Now, this axis of evil, basically Russia, China, and Iran. Why it is used? Because they are anti West in terms of the ideological foundations, in terms of economic modeling, and even in terms of policy making. They are not pro West and pro US. That is why the Western paraphernalia or the Western world, aided by or led by the US narrative, talks about them as the axis of evil. Now, this axis or this alliance, whatever it might be, evil, good, bane, boon, whatever it might be, but this alliance or the axis, so to say, finds itself absolutely fractured in the modern day and age when there are growing conflicts with each other. And that is where the conflict has challenged the long standing global narrative of a world where you have the blocks, the division of the world in the form of blocks like the Cold. You see, this again has been a creation of the Western mindset, where even today you will find the question, the most prominent question being asked from India by the Western world is that are you a US ally or are you a Russia ally? Because they like to place the countries in power block. That is how the entire Cold War narrative was woven, a bipolar world where you had two powers, right? Now, eventually, it led to unipolarity with the kind of entire, uh, uh, if you say, the breakdown of the Soviet Union and the creation of the smaller state of Russia. But nonetheless, now we are living in an era of multilateralism where national interests they take the prominence rather than being sided in a power block. So that is where the entire narrative of a power block creation that is challenged. But when it comes to the country like Iran, now thereby it finds itself slightly isolated when it comes to countries like Russia and even China. Having said that, it was only yesterday that the embassy, uh, the Iranian embassy in India, the consulate in India, had tweeted thanking the people of India for its support during this conflict. So Iran is out there trying to find newer partners which it can rely upon. The existing partners, they find themselves either weakened or in an emerging situation where they are afraid to take a tough stance. Now, here, what is the strategic relevance of Iran when it comes to other nations in the Axis, if you think about it? First of all, the geopolitical relevance. You see, when it comes to a nation like Syria, now, Syria, yesterday we had discussed, would be one of those proxies that Iran would oftentimes use. And that is why Iran would always had a tacit support to the Bashar al-Assad regime, which was known for various different genocidal acts and various different acts of violence in the state of Syria. But nonetheless, the Russians, with the help of the Iranians, managed to bring in certain amount of their marine naval force as well as the air force bases, particularly in the coastal regions around Latakia. But then, again, the weakening and the overthrow of the Bashar al Assad regime means Iran's influence in Syria that has waned. Now, with the withdrawal of Iranian influence in Syria, that means Russia's influence also, and the Russia's ability to, let's suppose, support Iranian action with the help of military force that has diminished. Right? So Russia's ability has reduced. Also, we have to keep in mind that majority of the Russian armed forces anyways are engaged on the Ukrainian front. Then, when it comes to strategic growth, now there again, Iran is vital when we talk about countries like India. Iran is seen as a vital node for India's access to the Central Asian market because Central Asia is a large market, it cannot be ignored. Now, India sees creation of Chabahar port as one of those access points to Afghanistan and beyond. But here also you have a limitation. It is not as if Central Asian market is giving us some amount of revenue as of now. It is a future perspective. It is a future source of revenue. So should we risk animosity with US in order to cater to a future market? Again, the answer would be negative. That brings about strategic ambiguity when we consider the stance taken by countries like India. So here, connectivity to Central Asia, right? Now, then you have the economic angle. Economic angle is multifarious. Here, Iran basically is a supplier of crude oil and gas. China has been benefiting from the cheap oil from Iran for a long period of time. In fact, Donald Trump himself said at the time of declaration of ceasefire, which obviously would be one of the most blatant declaration of ceasefire ever, where he basically said that China can now continue to buy oil from Iran to support Iran's economic activity. Now, that in itself, if we remove the strangeness part associated to it, it indicates the economic potential of a country like Iran. At the same time, Iran is also a vital source of provision of grains, for example, rice, etc., to the regions like Afghanistan. With the ongoing conflict, more than a lakh tons of basmati rice have been stranded in Indian ports now because the ports in Iran are basically facing a virtual closure, had been facing a virtual closure for that matter. So, when it comes to oil, when it comes to even fertilizers, Iran's role is significant. But again, there's a diversification of those sources nowadays. And there's a kind of a cultural connect as well. People to people connect in the region of West Asia and in the region of the rest of Asian region as well. So there, the relevance of Iran is there. Iran is identified as an important nation. But then why did the other countries not come to its rescue? That is a question. So when we talk about this axis of upheaval, so here China, Russia, and Iran, this axis, it is more notional, something which is a figment of imagination in the Western minds. Because we always like to place people as enemy and friends. That is the classification we like. But if we take a look at the reality, there is no such military alliance between Russia, China, and Iran. There is no sending of troops from Iran to Russia. It is true that Iran, in this conflict with Russia and Ukraine, has been providing Russia with armaments, has been providing Russia with drones, the cheaper drones out there. Russia, on the other hand, has been providing Iran with air defenses, the S-300, and so on. So there is a kind of defense partnership, and there's a kind of defense mutualism. But then, is that in a form of a concrete argument? No. The comprehensive partnership that Iran has had with both China and Russia, comprehensive partnership. Think about it. It ideally, when you talk about comprehensive partnership, it covers all the areas. But the comprehensive partnership that these two nations have with Iran, that is restricted to economic angle to get the natural resource. So that tells you the limitation of this axis of evil or this alliance, so to say. But at the same time, one cannot ignore the fact that there are no formal treaties or mutual defense agreements like the case of NATO, or earlier, what was the case of Seattle, CENTO, or the Warsaw Pact, no such military alliances. Now, these partnerships, just they only aim is to challenge the US led global order. They are against the US hegemony. They want the de dollarization of the global economy. And they carry out anti dollar initiatives in the groupings like the SCO and the BRICS are being used by these countries in order to argue against the US led world order. They also want an alternative to the economic transactions where the West can absolutely be ignored. That is what it is restricted. And the modern day geopolitics is also a reality. That is a rising China, a country which is rising to be a global superpower, doesn't want to pick and or doesn't want to take on a battle that is not at its doorsteps. China needlessly doesn't want to wade into a controversy, and that to a controversy with the sole surviving superpower, that is US. So that is why China has been very, very measured in making and providing a response. Even yesterday, China said that all that it hoped was a long-lasting ceasefire, and that would give rise to a long-lasting peace. So China is very measured. A weakened Russia, the fact that Vladimir Putin offered that he can mediate between Israel and Iran. Think about it. A country like Russia shying away from military help tells you about the weakened state of Russian hard power, particularly when it comes to regions far away from its territory. So, again, Russia is limited in the actions that it takes. A biased Turkey. For a long period of time, Iran did consider Turkey as a kind of a natural ally. And Turkey again finds itself on the midst of the crossroads. But this time, basically in the region of eastern Turkey, there was a radar site, which is a NATO controlled radar site. Now, Iran's argument is that all the information about the Iranian missiles that the Israelis were getting was based upon the feedback and the input from that radar site based in Turkey. And it was expected going ahead that Iran would attack that missile. So that is where Turkey is being eyed with a kind of a suspicion by Iran, even by the NATO alliance. And then comes a neutral India. India, which cannot take an anti Israel stance immediately, owing to Israel being only one of the major countries which supported India's action against terrorism. But at the same time, it could not ignore the cultural ties and the economic ties with Iran. That is where India has had a measured response. Iran finds itself in a kind of a precarious state where it cannot expect the voicing of support by its so called allies. So the axis of evil has been turned into an axis of upheaval whose actions are absolutely limited on paper. Okay? Now, after this, we come to the next article, that is enabling voting rights for migrants. Now, this article is written keeping in mind the upcoming Bihar elections in the later part of this. Now, during the electoral cycle, the people or the electorate or the voters in that particular state, they cast their vote. Now, when they cast their votes, they basically cast the vote keeping in mind what are the agendas which the government should fulfill in order to ensure that their lives get better, be it educational institutions, medical facilities, road, infrastructure, electricity, water supply, job opportunities, and so. But the problem with states like Bihar is Bihar has always been, and for a long period of time, has been a region of immigrants, not a region of immigrants. To simplify this, basically, if let's suppose a person migrates from a region A or moves from a region A to a region B, right? Let's suppose any individual P migrates from A to B. So P will be known as immigrant in A and will be referred to as immigrant in, right? Now, here there must have been certain factors which would have forced the individual P to move away from A. right? So those are your push factors. For example, lack of jobs, caste discrimination, geographical factors, disaster, hazards, etc. But at the same time, B must have certain factors due to which P is attracted to that place. Why is it that people move to Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Kolkata, Hyderabad, and so on? There must be certain attractive factors: creation of jobs, jobs, availability of better opportunities, availability or maybe open societies, lack of discrimination, so on and so forth. So, those are your pull factors. Pull factors generally indicate a kind of a prosperity in the region of destination. This is the place of origin for an immigrant of origin, and this is the place of destination. So, this is the dynamic of the entire aspect of migration. Okay. Now, Bihar being a region of immigrant, people have been migrating out of Bihar for a long period of time now, for decades now, either on a seasonal or a permanent basis. That means that the voter participation in the region of Bihar, that is abysmally low, lower than the national averages. In the last elections, there was a 10 percentage point gap, almost a 10 percentage point gap between the voter turnout in the national elections and the voter turnout in Bihar elections. Now, what this also means indirectly is, let's suppose a voter who is, let's suppose a resident of Bihar is not voting. That means the pressure groups, which are very important part of electoral democracy, now that is not functioning adequately well. Now, if all the people are migrating outward, then what is the force or the pressure on the elected representatives to create more institutions of education, more institutions of healthcare, and so on? Because people have migrated outwards. Anyone who is well to do, they have moved out of Bihar. So, in that particular scenario, what happens? There is a lack of social development. Lack of social development means what? Means again people will be forced to migrate outward, which means again what? Lack of incentive of creation of the social infrastructure further. So this is a kind of a perpetual cycle of poverty, so to say, but also the breakdown of social infrastructure. That is a kind of a perpetual, a vicious cycle in which the states like Bihar, Odisha, etc., they get trapped in. But then, capturing this voting pattern, or let's suppose the people's mandate from the people who have migrated out, what is the solution? Let's suppose you have an individual from Bihar who has migrated to Delhi or Mumbai. Now, how do you capture their electoral choices? The question. Now, Election Commission of India has been pondering about it and has provided certain solutions also. But the impact on voting patterns is substantial. That is where you have lack of pressure groups, right? Which are an important part of the entire electoral democratic process. Then, other than that, vicious cycle. I hope we are able to understand the vicious cycle. I will write it down as well. Cycle of breakdown of social development, right? What is it? So basically, out migration means lesser interest or lesser pressure to develop social infrastructure. And by social infra, what do we mean? Educational institutions, healthcare, law and order, etc. That means what? Poor infra. When you have poor infra, that will fuel out migration. So, this is a kind of a vicious cycle which does continue in the out migration states. Now, other than that, you also have the case of the loss of voter mandate. When the voters are not able to express their mandate or electoral choices, that is a loss of the voter mandate in itself and puts the entire exercise of election as futile. So that is again loss of mandate, right? Now, what election commission through its various papers and various different consultative committees has come forward with suggestions time and time again. One is the case of remote EV. What is this remote EV? And for whom is it targeted? So remote EVMs, they target the construction workers, the daily wage earners who have migrated out of the region or the state, and they are living in, or they are living in various different metropolitan cities or various parts of the country in low paying jobs. Now, for such individuals, it cannot be possible for them to travel all the way back to the state for one day for that election exercise. The entire travel cost in itself would be many times higher as compared to the daily wage that they earn. So they will never exercise that kind of an option. So that is why the Election Commission came up with the idea of remote EV, whereby every EVM would end up representing somewhat like 72 constituents, right? 72 constituents in terms of the option of the candidates that it will have. Now, let's suppose I am a voter who has migrated out of Bihar. I'm settled in Mumbai. Now, let's suppose I want to cast my vote for a particular district. I will have the EVM nearby me, where in a particular setup of the government or the election commission monitored setup, I can cast my vote. But then this has got a problem. The problem is administrative and executional. Here, one needs to capture the data of all those who have migrated out of Bihar and all those people who have migrated where they are living. That data needs to be absolute. And let's suppose in a particular region, let's suppose in a region like Mumbai, is it to be said that all the people who have come from Bihar, they have come from only one district? They could have come from multi districts. So, how many such remote EVMs will you install? So there is that administrative and executional imbalance and that hindrance which the election commission faces. The opposition parties have also raised their voices against this exercise, that it can lead to manipulation, it can lead to, again, the stealing of the mandate. But then the other option is postal ballots, something which is used for armed forces. Could we have the postal ballot system which is used even for the migrant work? Now, in theory, that works. Someone, let's suppose, who has migrated from Bihar to Delhi, with the help of the postal ballot, can cast their vote. Just like the vote for armed forces are counted, their vote can also be counted. But there's a problem in this also. What is the problem? Now, prior to elections in Bihar, Election Commission needs to know how many migrants from Bihar are living in Delhi, how many migrants from Bihar are living in Indore, how many migrants from Bihar are living, let's suppose, in Lucknow. That data again is absent. That data is not present. And again, people need to declare where they are coming from. Now, that in itself, people are many of the times reluctant to in a way, talk about where they are coming from, their identity, etc. People are reluctant to do so. So that again is out of question. So, what is the only plausible solution here? The only plausible solution which the article argues is that if a person has migrated to another or a place of destination and has been living there for 6 months or more, they should switch the constituencies where they are voting, because now their interest lies in the betterment of the constituency they are living in. To simplify it, let's suppose someone has migrated from the northeastern drought prone area of Bihar, let's suppose an Araria or a Farbisganj, to, let's suppose, Mumbai. And that migrant has been living in Mumbai for 5 years. Now, the welfare of that migrant will be dependent on the policies that the Maharashtra government takes in, the policies that the BMC takes in. isn't it? Rather than what is happening in Araria, his or her immediate future is dependent upon what is happening in Mumbai. So that is what the article argues, that these voters should switch the constituency where they are voting if they are residing in that region for 6 months more. But in any condition, we should not allow the value of a vote to go to waste. Okay, so that is the aspect of the migrant and the migrant voting pattern. Right now, let us take a look at the practice question. Discuss the impact of migration in electoral democracy. Analyze the issues faced in gauging the electoral mandate in the migrant population. A 15 marker question. How do you approach this? So, in the intro, you talk about the issues in migration. So, you talk about in the intro the reality of internal migration, that every year internal migration is in the tunes of lakhs and crores of people. And there's a continued flux of people moving from rural to urban areas and vice versa within the state and across the states as well. Now, this creates a particular issue when it comes to exercising of elect or voting rights. That will be your intro. Then, after that, when you start writing about the body, then you talk about the role of this migration in terms of the electoral democracy. Now, here, talk about both immigrant and immigrant role. So, in a region, let's suppose you have a lot of immigrant population, that also impacts the election process in that area. You have pressure groups in that region. That can be a reason for divide in the society as well. We have seen that previously in many of the states. Then, in the region where there is that immigrant population, there talk about the vicious cycle that we have discussed. And then the issues faced in gauging the electoral mandate. So, after you have done talking about the implications, thereafter, Election Commission has come up with certain ideas, remote EVMs and postal ballots. Talk about the issue by both of them. Eventually, in the conclusion and the way forward, talk about switching the voting constituency of the migrants. That can be a way to capture their electoral mandate. That will be your way forward. Okay. Now, after this, moving on to the next article. Now, this is an article which is a continuum again of the census exercise, which has been in news for the past month almost continuously every. Now, you also would be aware that the census exercise, which is scheduled for the year 2027, now that is supposed to be carried out in. And one important part associated is that this census exercise will be the first one after a long period of time to capture the caste data. So a caste census will be captured. Now here, the caste census, before that, when we a basic revision of the census exercise, which will be carried out, it will be carried out in two phases. Next year, there will be the phase of house listing, house listing. And then the year after that, there will be enumeration, population enumeration. Now, in both these exercises, questions are asked to the citizens, to the individuals. For example, in the house listing, type of houses that they live in, etc. We will take a look at some of the sample questions also. Now, say, caste and enumerating the caste. This was for the last time done in 1941. But then the data could not be crunched owing to the economic realities of the Second World War. So the last detailed caste data that we have is the 1931 census. That is the last detailed caste idea that we have and the caste classification. So after this, for the first time, this caste detail is captured. And what is the purpose behind it? The purpose is to understand the socio-economic status of people belonging to different groups and thereby understand that affirmative action, which is played by the government, the state government, the central government. Now, those policies, are they effective? Are they relevant in the modern day times? Or are they still following a trend which was relevant in 1931? So, this can be the caste exercise or the caste census exercise can be seen as a tool for efficient affirmative action. A tool for efficient affirmative action by the government. Affirmative action to provide upliftment, right? With the help of reservation, etc. Now, the problem arises when, let's suppose, you take a look at the questions. That is what the article argues. The article argues that, look, in the case of house listing, these are the type of questions that are asked. Type of houses, pakka, semi-pakka, kacha, number of rooms in the house, ownership status, source of drinking water, availability of electricity, gadgets that you have, radio, mobile, television, type of fuel used for cooking, availability and type of toilet facility, wastewater outlet location, computer access. These are some of the type of questions which are asked. Now, the article argues that, look, when it comes to caste, designating people of certain caste with the type of houses, that can be true and that can yield some result when it comes to tribal areas, the ST region. But when it comes to other caste, then it will have a limited outcome when it comes to classifying that, okay, the people of this caste group, they have been enabled with pakka houses or they don't have this available. So the outcome is very limited. When it comes to the enumeration exercise, where the demographic details are captured, that is for population enumeration, that is where you ask about the age, sex, then let's suppose child survivability, employment status. It is here again where the question associated with caste has got a limited or a limited outcome. It can give you an idea about the health status. It can give you an idea about the literacy rate. But beyond that, it has got limitations. What are the limitations? So, the limitations in the present set of questions are that, for example, let's suppose data on unemployment. Now, data on unemployment, when the question is asked, it talks about the past year, when you have been unemployed for the past year. That is captured under the data for unemployment. Now, how many of them are seeking employment? That is also the reality of it. I might not have a job. I might not need a job. I might be very happy in the present state that I am. So that is where the aspect of since when seeking employment. So that is where it is not clearly defined. So this data of unemployment, which can give you a caste based analysis of people who are in jobs and people who are without job, that will have a limited outcome. Then there is a question about childbirth and survival, which is being asked for decades now. Now that again is better captured when you consider National Family and Health Survey, NFHS data. NFHS data, which captures the infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, that captures it in much greater detail. Caste wise enumeration will be difficult. Even otherwise, the questions which are framed, if people are not trained and if logical questions are not asked, many people, they are not aware about the official name of their caste. And that would be true amongst all of us. We might be aware of the local regional name of the caste group, but maybe in official document it is listed as something else. So that will be an enumeration problem, and that would lead to data inconsistency. Also, during this census exercise, what is generally done is that the household head, their caste is captured. Now, it might be the case that a particular family might have multiple different castes, right? A caste diversity within a large family, a family might exist. So again, that would lead to data inconsistency. So that is where the argument by this article is that, look, if you are about to carry the caste census, ensure that you reframe the questions, you curate the questions, and you ensure the training of the professional. The enumerators who go out to ask the caste data, they should be aware, they should be able to interact with the local population and the local population only when they are comfortable of their privacy, of their secrecy, only then will they reveal the caste. At the same time, the house listing exercise which is done. Now, the article argues that during this house listing exercise, don't bring in questions of caste. Just measure or have an enumeration of how many houses and structures are there, residential, uh, non-residential, and so on, so that you have an exact idea of the houses, number of houses that is accurate, and train more people during the population enumeration exercise so that they can reach all these houses with greater efficiency, rather than having a house listing exercise also consisting of some inconsistent caste data, the population enumeration exercise also consisting of some caste data. Both of them will not match, and eventually the entire exercise will be futile because you don't have a conclusive evidence out. That was the case with the socio-economic caste census with 2011 as well. In 2011, when the socio-economic caste census exercise were carried out, huge inconsistencies in the data between the house listing phase and the population enumeration phase meant that that data was never publicized and was not used for any affirmative action. Article argues carry out house listing exercise, and during the population enumeration exercise, train the people, professionals, and curate special. Okay. Now, then the next question, the next article, that is Iran-Israel war highlights Mideast's waning sway on oil. Now, you see, whenever the West Asia region or Mideast, so to say, has been in crisis, be it the 1973 war or the 1990 Gulf War or the subsequent Gulf War, that has experienced a jump in the oil. Now, during 1973 war and the crisis at that point of time, now the oil prices quadrupled. During 1979, the embargo, again the oil prices jumped. It was during this 1973 war where you had a kind of a cartelization by the OPEC nations, which followed in 1979 as well. And remember, it was in 1973 during this oil crisis when we faced a BOP crisis, balance of payment crisis as well. Then again, the Gulf War crisis in the 1990 meant the larger world was troubled by it. Oil prices almost doubled, and countries like India, we had to go to the doorsteps of IMF. But this time's crisis did not see that much volatility in the oil. For that matter, in the days in following the crisis and the war as it evolved, the oil prices plummeted to a level which was lower than the pre-war level as well. So that indicates a new geopolitical reality. Very briefly, let us talk about it. That why is it that this time the oil prices have not suffered such a major volatility or a major shock? First reason is markets now are more rational. Markets are aware that any crisis when it comes to, let's suppose, US Iran or the case of Israel Iran, now that will continue only as long as both the countries have the power of tolerance. It will eventually be brokered into a kind of a ceasefire and peace. That is something that the markets are aware of. So they don't panic immediately. Also, the investors, they are more tech savvy and they follow the developments more carefully. With the help of satellite imagery, they are able to capture the functioning and the activities in the oil fields and refineries on a day to day basis. So, as long as the refineries, the offshore rigs, etc., they are working, they don't panic and they don't have the money interaction, which keeps the volatility to a lower level. It also indicates that there is a doubt in Iran's hard power. Because despite the fact and the threat issued by Iran that we are going to block the Strait of Hormuz continued its activity and the navigation. Not only because of the fact that the US had deployed multiple aircraft carriers almost preemptively, but also the investors and other countries concerned, they were aware that Iran has got limited power. It cannot block the entire Strait of Hormuz. Then, even when we talk about the other suppliers in the Persian Gulf, Qatar, Kuwait, etc. Now, their interests were also hinged upon the functioning of the trade and navigation. And they also ensured that from their side, no such sudden actions would be taken which would lead the markets into a shock. So, due to these particular reasons, the market reacted in a rational manner. And that also indicates the new geopolitical reality that we are living in. There is reduced economic shocks on the offing owing to sudden declaration of. The last time it did happen was when the Russia Ukraine war erupted. Now, reduced ability for strategic blackmailing by countries of West Asia. For a long period of time, countries in West Asia, they have used this strategic blackmailing that if you attack us, if there is any harm to us, the global energy trade in itself will be disrupted and all the countries will suffer. Now, the diversification of sources of energy, etc., which have happened, that indicates that all these countries they have their limited ability to influence the action taken by other nations. So that also tells you about the diversification of the sources of energy. So, in this new geopolitical reality of multilateralism, where multilateralism is the true essence of the day and the present conditions that we are living in, every country has the ability to simply switch to other source and other suppliers of energy. The prices might be volatile for a brief period of time, but not for years and years, as would be the case decades earlier. So this indicates a new form of economic stability and the market realization. Okay? Rational market basically represents the case that the markets, when they are making the decision, they are much more rational in their choice. Okay? Now, now coming to certain articles relevant for your prelim. Basically, you have an article in page 3 of the newspaper where organizations oppose Assam Meghalaya hydropower project. Now, on the face of it, the article basically argues that the proposed hydropower project at the Assam Meghalaya border region, now that will have an impact on the downstream flow of the river. The river in question is actually River Kulsi. We will cover greater detail of this under the edition of Places in News to be released next Saturday. So, River Kulsi basically is a tributary of river Brahmaputra. It is a left bank tributary of river Brahmaputra. Left bank. Okay. Which joins river Brahmaputra in the Kamrup district of Assam. So that becomes relevant for your exam. Now, there are certain lakes in discussion also, but detailed discussion under the portion of places here only about river Kulsi. So begins in the West Khasi Hills, where it is known as the Cree River. Now travels about 12 kilometers within Meghalaya before entering Assam, a small distance within Meghalaya, mostly within Assam, crosses into Kamrup district near the Unkiam region and the border crossing at the Meghalaya. And from this, it is officially known as the Kulsi. So Kulsi, the tributary of which river or which stream? That is right. Then the festival in news. So the festival basically here you see that the steps of the Golconda fort for the annual Bonalu festival is decorated. So what is this Bonalu festival? This can be relevant for the prelims examination for your questions associated with art and culture. Now this is a Hindu festival associated with the worship of the goddess Mahakali. Now, here it is an annual festival celebrated in the twin cities of Hyderabad and Sikandrabad and other parts of Telangana state. Now, overall, Bonalu is celebrated in the usually the Ashad Masam that falls in July and August, where you have for the few days the veneration of the goddess Yalama that is also done. So that is the overall aspect of festival. Hyderabad, Sikandrabad region. Now it starts at the Golconda Fort, right? And thereby, second Saturday, it moves to the Yelama temple, right, in Balkampet. So that is the aspect of this festival relevant only for your prelims. Now, rural demand likely recovered. This is an article which has appeared in the business section of the newspaper, which talks about the fact that in the month of May, amongst all the major economies, India is the only economy which has indicated a robust demand growth. All the various different economies have experienced, major economies that is, they have experienced a contraction in export demand, etc. And India is an outlier. The PMI, the Producers Manufacturer Index as well. So that also indicates an expansion. And that expansion is also restricted to the country like. Now, that is indicative and that is reflective of the fact that the rural demand in the country has picked up. Now, rural demand in a country like India is very, very vital because when the rural demand picks up, that basically means that there will be greater consumption in the rural areas, means greater production in the urban areas, job creation, and eventually the GDP, the cycle rolls forward. So that is where it is a good sign for the country going ahead into the future. The PMI or the index will be released in the next couple of days, which will tell you the exact scale of expansion. PMI, if it is greater than 50, indicates expansion. If it is at 50, it indicates status quo, and less than 50 indicates a state of contract. Now, then Bharat Biotech to supply GSK's malaria vaccine to Gavi in 26. Now, GSK and Bharat Biotech, they have come up. Basically, it is a vaccine against malaria developed by GSK. Now, Bharat Biotech has indicated that it will supply this to Gavi. Now, when we talk about GAVI, that is relevant for the examination. Now, GAVI is set up as a global health partnership. That is the vaccine alliance, so to say, which was set up in 2000 to create equal access to new and underused vaccine for children living in world's poorest countries. In those regions, particularly the regions like parts of Asia, parts of Africa, where people cannot afford vaccine, Gavi provides vaccines at affordable rate. Now, this Gavi created in 2000 has got a secretariat and a board. Secretariat takes care of day-to-day functioning, and board takes care of the strategic decision making. Now, the board comprises of 18 representative seats, 9 seats for independent and unaffiliated individuals, and 1 for the seat. So basically, UNICEF, WHO, World Bank, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they hold permanent seats in Gavi. That is relevant for your exam. Rest of the forum material tells you about Gavi, but then again, something that you should not memorize. Here, constituency representatives serve on limited time basis. Two-thirds of the voting rights and the voting members of the board are representative from vaccine alliance partners, whereas one-third of its voting members, they are independent who are unaffiliated. So this is the constitution of Gavi and the membership with Gavi. Now, the last article of the day. India may retaliate against the US if talks on steel aluminium tariffs fail. Now, India basically has been negotiating with US for a trade. It is aimed to be concluded or partially concluded at least prior to 9th of July because US has given that kind of interregnum or a gap before the tariffs are imposed. Now, tariffs which will impact India are tariffs on steel, aluminium, etc. Now, here, as the trade negotiations are going on, India looks at US in order to bring back or roll back the 25-26% tariffs that it is introducing on steel and aluminium products from India. Now, on the other hand, US had already done so previously in the previous Trump regime. Now, when India faced these tariffs from US earlier, India retaliated and India imposed tariffs on US items. So India imports what from US? India imports agro products like pistachios, almonds, lentils, etc. from the US. So on those items, India had imposed a retaliatory tariff. Now, Joe Biden, in his final years in 2023, rolled back some of these tariffs. So, as a consequence, India also rolled back the tariffs on pistachios and on the other agro business. So right now, India is making its intentions known that if the trade talks fail, if both US and India don't come on an agreeing table or an agreement regarding the tariff issue, thereby India will face tariffs on steel, aluminium. It will impose tariffs on agro products that is being imported by US. So that is the reality of the trade talks which are going on. And that brings us to the end of the discussion. So, in total, we have discussed 10 different topics of varying length and importance for the examination. I hope this has enriched your content and given you certain perspective in the articles that we have discussed. If you have liked the content, put that in the comment section, and please don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. We'll see you today evening at 7 p.m. on the exercise and the discussion of the PYQs when it comes to the mains examination and the areas to focus upon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.